The shores of Scheria. The golden finger of Eos touched the horizon, but Odysseus remained entombed in his nest of olive leaves. He lay in a sleep so thick, it felt less like rest and more like a heavy shroud, the salt of the sea still encrusted in his beard. He was a man stripped of everything, his crew, his spoils, and his very clothes. Yet the twin olive trees, one wild and one grafted, sheltered him from the piercing wind. While Odysseus slept, the goddess Athena was busy weaving the threads of his rescue. She appeared in the dreams of Nausicaa, the daughter of King Alcinous of the Phaeacians, urging her to take the palace linens to the river to be washed. By midday, the silence of the thicket was shattered. The princess and her handmaids had finished their chores and begun a game of ball. Their high-pitched laughter and shouts echoed across the shoreline. When a stray throw sent the ball splashing into a deep eddy, a collective shriek of delight and dismay jolted Odysseus from his death-like trance. Odysseus emerged from the bushes like a mountain lion, weather-beaten, salt-scoured, and stark naked. He broke off a leafy branch to cover his modesty, his eyes wild and desperate. The handmaids scattered in terror, but Nausicaa, her courage bolstered by Athena, stood her ground. Odysseus, ever the master of words, did not approach her or clasp her knees in the traditional gesture of a suppliant. He knew his bedraggled appearance would only frighten her more. Instead, he spoke from a distance with the silver tongue of a diplomat. "Are you a goddess or a mortal? If you are a goddess, I can only compare you to Artemis. If you are a mortal, thrice blessed are your father and mother." Moved by his eloquence and his plight, Nausicaa showed the true spirit of Xenia, hospitality. She provided him with olive oil to bathe and cleanse the brine from his skin, fine garments of tunic and cloak, food and wine to restore his strength. As he bathed, Athena poured a divine grace over him, making him appear taller and more muscular, his hair curling like hyacinth petals. When he emerged, even the princess was struck by his transformation, secretly wishing for a husband of such caliber. Nausicaa, mindful of the town gossips, instructed Odysseus to follow her cart at a distance until they reached the city. She gave him specific directions to the palace and a crucial piece of advice: bypass the king and go straight to her mother, Queen Arete. As Odysseus walked toward the shimmering bronze walls of the Phaeacian city, he felt the familiar pull of hope. He was no longer a shipwrecked ghost. He was a guest of the greatest sailors in the world. The city of the Phaeacians rose from the cliffs like a dream made of silver and bronze. As Odysseus approached the gates, a thick, shimmering mist began to coil around his ankles, rising until it shielded him from the eyes of the bustling sailors and merchants. This was the work of Athena, ensuring no passerby would insult or challenge the stranger before he reached the throne. Amidst the fog, a young girl carrying a golden pitcher crossed his path. Odysseus did not know it was the goddess in disguise. "Little one," he said softly, "could you show a weary traveler the way to the house of Alcinous?" "I will lead you, grandfather," she replied, her voice like the chiming of small bells. "But walk in silence. My people do not always welcome those from across the sea." When the mist finally parted, Odysseus gasped. He stood before a palace that defied the logic of the mortal world. Sheets of solid bronze that captured the afternoon sun. The doors, hammered gold, guarded by silver and gold hounds that seemed to breathe and blink. The garden, a 4-acre orchard where the pears, pomegranates, and glowing apples never withered. In Phaeacia, The west wind blew year-round, ripening one fruit while the next was still a bud. For a moment, the man who had seen the Cyclops' cave and Circe's halls felt small. He was a king of rocky Ithaca, a land of goats and scrub, standing in a realm of impossible wealth. Odysseus strode through the high-roofed hall. The Phaeacian lords were seated at their banquet, pouring libations of wine to Hermes. None saw him. Athena's mist still clung to his skin, until he reached the center of the room. There sat Queen Arete, spinning sea-purple wool, with King Alcinous beside her. Odysseus dropped to his knees. At that exact moment, the mist vanished. It was as if a ghost had materialized out of the very air. The hall fell into a stunned, suffocating silence. The lords froze with their golden cups halfway to their lips. "Arete, daughter of Rhexenor," Odysseus cried, grasping her knees. "I come to you as a man who has suffered beyond measure. Grant me passage to my fatherland, for I have been far from my loved ones for too long." He stepped back and sat in the ashes of the hearth, the ultimate sign of humility for a guest. It was the eldest lord, Echanius, who finally broke the silence, reminding the king that it was beneath his dignity to let a guest sit in the dust. Alcinous, a man of quick grace, rose and took Odysseus by the hand. He raised him up and seated him in a silver-studded chair, displacing his own favorite son to make room. "Bring the wine," Alcinous commanded. "We shall wash the hands of this stranger and offer him meat. Whether he is a god in disguise or a mortal cast away by the sea, he shall be treated as a brother." As the feast resumed, Queen Arete watched the stranger with narrowing eyes. She recognized the clothes he wore, the fine tunic and cloak Nausicaa had given him. They were her own handiwork, woven by her and her maids. "Stranger?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. "I will ask you first. Who are you? And more importantly, where did you get those clothes?" Odysseus leaned back, the scent of roasted meat filling his lungs, but his heart remained heavy. He was not yet ready to speak the name that would change everything. He was not yet ready to say, "I am Odysseus." "Sing of the wooden horse," Odysseus said, his voice thick. "Sing of how Epius built it and how great Odysseus led it into the citadel of Troy." Demodocus struck a low, resonant chord. He sang of the night the city fell, the treachery, the leaping flames, and the slaughter of the Trojans. He sang of Odysseus as if he were a god of war, a whirlwind of bronze and cunning. At this, Odysseus broke. He wept as a woman weeps when she flings herself upon the body of her husband who has fallen in battle defending his city. King Alcinous stood, his golden staff ringing against the stone floor. "Silence!" he commanded. "The bard's song brings no joy to our guest. Ever since he arrived, he has not ceased from his grieving." The music died. Every eye in the hall turned toward the hooded figure. The firelight flickered against the bronze pillars, casting long shadows. "Stranger," Alcinous said, his voice firm but kind, "do not hide your identity any longer. Tell us the name your father and mother gave you. Tell us your land, your people, and why the fate of Troy brings such agony to your soul." Odysseus slowly lowered his cloak. He wiped the tears from his eyes, and for the first time, the weary traveler looked like a king. The air in the room grew heavy, as if the gods themselves had entered to listen. "I am Odysseus, son of Laertes," he said, his voice echoing in the rafters. "A name known to all men for my cunning. My fame has reached the very heavens, and my home is Ithaca, the rugged isle, which I have not seen for 20 long years." The hall fell into a silence so profound that the crackle of the hearth fire sounded like thunder. Odysseus leaned forward, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames as if they were the burning towers of Ilium. "The wind that carried me from Troy," he began, his voice dropping to a gravelly resonance, "brought me first to Ismarus, the city of the Cicones. We sacked the place, but my men, fools that they were, stayed too long feasting on wine and sheep while the inland tribes gathered like the leaves of spring. We escaped, but with empty benches where brave men once sat. For 9 days, a north wind drove his 12 ships past Cythera, pushing them into the unknown reaches of the great South Sea. On the 10th day, they made landfall on a shimmering, lethargic coast. Odysseus sent 3 scouts to probe the interior. They did not return with reports of giants or monsters, but something far more dangerous: apathy. The honeyed fruit, the natives, the lotus eaters, offered his men the flower of the lotus. The effect: those who ate it lost all memory of home. The tug of Ithaca, the faces of their wives, and the duty to their king vanished like mist. They wanted only to stay in that sun-drenched haze, browsing on the flowery fruit forever. "I had to drag them back to the ships," Odysseus said, his jaw tightening. "They wailed and pleaded, but I bound them beneath the rowing benches and commanded the rest to strike the grey sea with their oars before the infection of forgetfulness took us all." They sailed on, hearts heavy, until they reached the land of the Cyclops. Odysseus described them not as men, but as monstrous marvels, lawless giants who neither planted crops nor held assemblies, living in mountain caves with no regard for the gods or the guest code of Xenia. Curiosity, the trait that was both Odysseus's greatest strength and his deadliest flaw, led him to take 12 of his best men and a skin of potent, unmixed wine to explore a massive cave near the shore. Inside, they found crates of drying cheeses and pens overflowing with lambs. His men pleaded with him to take the food and run, but Odysseus shook his head. "I wished to see the owner," he admitted to the Phaeacians, "and see if he would give me a guest gift. It was a wish that would cost many of my companions their lives." The ground suddenly trembled. A shadow eclipsed the cave mouth. Polyphemus, the son of Poseidon, had returned with his flocks. With a grunt of effortless strength, the giant heaved a massive boulder across the entrance, a stone so heavy that 22 four-wheeled wagons could not have budged it. They were trapped in the dark with a titan, and when the giant lit his fire and his single, lidless eye settled upon the shivering Greeks, the nightmare began. The firelight in the Phaeacian hall seemed to dim as Odysseus spoke of the giant's eye, a single bloodshot orb that rolled in its socket, settling on the cowering men like a predator marking its prey. "Strangers!" the giant's voice boomed, a sound like a mountain collapsing. "Are you traders, or pirates who roam the seas, risking your lives to bring havoc to others?" Odysseus, his knees shaking but his mind already spinning a web, spoke of Agamemnon and the glory of Troy, pleading for the sacred rights of a guest. Polyphemus only laughed, a hollow, terrifying sound. "You are a fool, stranger," the Cyclops sneered. "We Cyclopes care nothing for Zeus or his laws. We are much stronger than the gods." Without another word, the monster's hands shot out like lightning. He snatched up two of Odysseus's companions, dashing their heads against the stone floor as if they were puppies. The Phaeacians gasped as Odysseus described the gore, the brains spattered on the ground, the giant ripping the limbs apart to feast on them, washing the raw meat down with buckets of sheep's milk. "We wept and lifted our hands to Zeus," Odysseus said, his voice dropping to a whisper. But the giant simply lay down among his flocks and slept, his belly full of human flesh. Odysseus knew he could not kill the giant while he slept. If he pierced that massive heart, the boulder would remain, sealing the cave as their tomb. He needed a cunning escape. The weapon. He found a staff of green olive wood, thick as a mast, and had his men sharpen the tip to a point and harden it in the fire. The wine. When the giant returned the next night and ate 2 more men, Odysseus stepped forward with a bowl of the dark, unmixed wine he had brought from the ship. "Drink this, Cyclops," he urged. "It is a divine nectar." The drunken promise. Polyphemus drained 3 bowls, his senses reeling. "Tell me your name, little man," he grunted, "and I will give you a guest gift." "My name is Nobody," Odysseus replied. "That is what my mother and father and all my friends call me." "Then here is your gift," the giant bellowed, his head lolling. "I will eat nobody last." The blinding of the godsons. As the giant fell into a drunken stupor, vomiting wine and bits of men, Odysseus and 4 of his bravest sailors thrust the olive stake into the embers until the tip glowed red. With a collective heave, they drove the burning point directly into the giant's single eye. Odysseus leaned on the pole, twisting it like a shipwright drills a timber. The eyeball sizzled. The eyelids and brows were scorched by the steam of the boiling blood. Polyphemus let out a scream that shook the very foundations of the island. He pulled the stake from his eye and called out to his fellow Cyclopes who lived in the nearby caves. They rushed to the entrance, shouting through the boulder, "Polyphemus, who is hurting you? Why do you cry out in the night?" From inside, the blinded giant roared, "Nobody is killing me by fraud. Nobody is killing me by force." The other giants shrugged. "Well," they grumbled, "if nobody is hurting you, it must be a plague from Zeus. Pray to your father Poseidon." And they walked away. Odysseus's voice dropped to a low, rhythmic cadence. The Phaeacians, leaning so far forward, they nearly tumbled from their benches. The giant groaned in agony. Odysseus continued, groping with his massive, blood-slicked hands for the entrance. He heaved the boulder aside, but he sat in the gateway with his arms outstretched, thinking he would catch any man who tried to slip past with the sheep. He thought I was a fool, but I had the wit of Athena behind me. Odysseus looked at the great rams of the flock, thick-fleeced, violet-black, and well-fed. He saw his salvation in their wool. Using willow withes, flexible twigs, from the giant's own bed, Odysseus lashed the rams together in groups of 3. The concealment. He tucked one of his men under the belly of each middle ram, protected on either side by the flank of another beast. The king's choice. For himself, Odysseus chose the lead ram, the finest of the flock. He curled his body beneath its shaggy underbelly, his fingers buried deep in the miraculous curling fleece, and hung there with his heart pounding against the animal's ribs. At dawn, the ewes bleated in the pens, their udders heavy. But the blind giant had only enough strength to let the rams out to pasture. As each animal passed, Polyphemus ran his hands over their backs, checking for the men he thought would be riding them. He stopped the lead ram, the very one carrying Odysseus. "My favorite ram," the giant whimpered, his voice cracking. "Why are you the last to leave the cave today? Usually, you are the first to reach the clover. Do you grieve for your master's eye, which that wicked nobody destroyed?" Odysseus held his breath, his face inches from the giant's searching fingers. If the ram stumbled, or if Odysseus's grip failed, he would be crushed like a grape. But the ram paced forward, and the giant let him go, oblivious to the king of Ithaca, clinging to the wool beneath. Once clear of the cave, they sprinted for the ships, driving the fat sheep before them. They scrambled onto the benches, their oars catching the grey water. But as the shore began to recede, the cunning Odysseus was replaced by the proud Odysseus. He could not let the giant suffer in ignorance. He wanted his glory recorded. "Cyclops!" he shouted across the water, his voice carrying over the waves. "If anyone asks who blinded you, tell them it was Odysseus, sacker of cities, son of Laertes, who lives in Ithaca." The giant let out a roar that seemed to split the sky. He tore the peak off a mountain and hurled it at the sound of the voice. The massive rock splashed just ahead of the bow, the backwash nearly driving the ship back onto the shore. Polyphemus raised his hands to the dark, starless sky and prayed to his father, the Earth-shaker. "Hear me, Poseidon, girdler of the earth. If I am truly your son, grant that Odysseus may never reach his home. But if he is fated to see his people again, let him come late, in a foreign ship, a broken man, having lost all his comrades, and let him find bitter grief waiting in his house." "The god heard him," Odysseus said to the silent Phaeacian hall, his eyes dark with the memory. "And that was the beginning of my true sorrow." The Phaeacian lord sat motionless as the echoes of the Cyclops' curse seemed to vibrate through the stone hall. Odysseus took a long draught of wine, his eyes fixed on the embers of the hearth, before continuing his tale of hope and the devastating folly of men. "We sailed on, hearts heavy for our fallen brothers, but glad to have escaped death," Odysseus said. "Soon we reached the island of Aeolia, a strange, floating kingdom walled in indestructible bronze. There lived Aeolus, son of Hippotas, whom Zeus had made the keeper of the winds. For a full month, Aeolus hosted them with limitless hospitality, feasting them on roasted meats and honeyed wine, while Odysseus recounted the tales of Troy. When the time came to depart, the king of the winds gave Odysseus a gift that should have ended his journey then and there. Aeolus took the hide of a 9-year-old ox and bound within it the buzzing, chaotic energies of every wind that could blow a ship off course, the north, the south, and the gusting east. He lashed the bag shut with a silver cord so tight that not even a stray breath could escape. The path. He summoned only the west wind, Zephyr, to blow steadily against their sails, a gentle hand pushing them straight toward the shores of Ithaca. 10 days of hope. "For 9 days and nights we sailed," Odysseus whispered, his voice cracking. "On the 10th day, the miracle happened. I saw the cooking fires of my own kingdom. I saw the rugged peaks of Ithaca rising from the sea. I was so close I could see the men tending the coastal beacons. Exhausted by 9 days of constant steering, and believing the danger had passed, Odysseus finally let his eyelids close. He fell into a deep, treacherous sleep. As their leader slept, the crew began to mutter. They looked at the mysterious ox-hide bag sitting by the mast, its silver cord glinting in the sun. "Look at the luck of our captain," one grumbled. "He returns from Troy with crates of gold and bronze, while we go home with empty hands. And now Aeolus has given him more secret treasures in this bag." Driven by suspicion and a hunger for gold, they loosened the silver cord. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The trapped winds, the screaming gales of the world, burst forth in a singular, howling explosion. The ships were snatched from the very harbor of Ithaca. The despair. Odysseus woke to the screaming of the rigging and the sight of his home vanishing over the horizon. He contemplated throwing himself into the dark water to end his shame, but he forced himself to endure. The hurricane-force winds blew them all the way back to Aeolia. The rejection of the gods. When Odysseus crawled back into the hall of Aeolus, begging for help once more, the king of the winds recoiled in horror. "Begone from this island, most cursed of living men," Aeolus shouted. "It is not right for me to help a man whom the blessed gods loathe so much. Your return proves the immortals have marked you for ruin." And so, Odysseus told the Phaeacians, we rowed away with no wind at all, our hearts breaking as we labored against a sea that had turned its face against us. The Phaeacian hall grew colder as Odysseus spoke of Lamos. This was not a tale of a single monster or a foolish mistake, but of a slaughter so total it nearly ended his legend before he could reach the halls of Circe. "For 6 days and nights we rowed," Odysseus said, his voice dropping to a hollow rasp. "No wind touched our sails, and the oars felt like lead in our blistered hands. On the 7th day, we reached the towering citadel of Lamos, the city of the Laestrygonians. The harbor was a natural wonder, a narrow neck of water flanked by sheer, uncluttered cliffs that rose like walls of obsidian. Inside, the water was as still as a mirror, protected from every wind and wave. My 11 other captains, weary of the open sea, steered their ships deep into the bowl of the harbor, mooring them side by side. The king's caution, but a cold shiver of dread climbed my spine. I alone moored my dark, proud ship outside the harbor, lashing the cables to a rock at the very edge of the sea. I sent 3 men inland to scout the smoke rising from the woods. They met a girl at a spring, a massive maiden, tall as a mountain peak, who led them to the palace of her father, Antiphates. "They did not find a king," Odysseus whispered. "They found a nightmare." When my men entered the hall, they were met by the queen of the Laestrygonians, a woman as huge as a cliff-top. She shrieked for her husband, and Antiphates came running, not with a scepter, but with a hunger that defied the gods. Without a word of greeting, the giant snatched up one of my scouts and tore him apart to prepare his midday meal. The alarm. The other 2 fled, terror winging their feet, but the giant raised a cry that echoed through the city like a war horn. The rain of rocks. Thousands of giants, vast as titans, swarmed the cliffs overlooking the harbor where my 11 ships lay trapped. They did not use spears or arrows. They tore boulders from the mountainside and hurled them down upon the wooden hulls. The sound was a symphony of ruin, Odysseus said, his hands trembling. The splintering of oak, the groans of dying men, and the horrific splashing as the giants dived into the water to spear my drowning comrades like fish on a string. They hauled the bodies away in heaps to feed their monstrous kin. From my vantage point outside the harbor, I watched the destruction of my entire fleet. 11 ships and hundreds of men vanished in the heartbeat of an afternoon. I did not wait for the giants to find my cable, Odysseus said. I drew my sword and hacked the rope from the rock. I shouted to my crew to row for their very souls, and we fled into the open sea, leaving the screaming harbor behind. He looked around the Phaeacian hall, his eyes red-rimmed. I was the king of 12 ships when I left Troy. I was a captain of 1 when I reached the next shore. The flashback concluded, and a heavy silence settled over the hall of Alcinous. Odysseus had finished the long, harrowing thread of his tale, from the madness of the Cyclops to the years spent in Calypso's silk-draped prison. The Phaeacians sat spellbound, the wine in their cups untouched, held fast by the magic of his words. King Alcinous was the first to rise, his voice echoing with newfound reverence. Odysseus, now that you have reached my bronze-floored house, I promise you shall not be driven back. You have suffered enough. The Phaeacians were not content with mere words. Following the laws of Xenia, each of the 12 peers of the realm brought a massive bronze tripod and a cauldron, along with robes and hammered gold. Queen Arete herself packed his gifts into a beautiful sea chest, securing it with a knot Odysseus had learned from Circe, one that no thief could pick. The sacrifice. At dawn, Alcinous sacrificed an ox to Zeus, and the day was spent in one final grand feast. Yet, throughout the day, Odysseus kept turning his head toward the sun. He watched its slow arc across the sky with the desperation of a plowman who longs for his dinner after a day in the furrow. He was ready to go. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Odysseus walked down to the shore. The Phaeacian sailors, the greatest navigators of the world, had prepared a swift, black-prowed ship. They laid out rugs and linen on the hollow deck so their guest could sleep undisturbed. The moment Odysseus lay down, a sweet sleep, deep and dreamless, fell upon him, a sleep so profound it resembled death itself. The ship did not sail as other ships do. The Phaeacian vessels were legendary. They had no rudders or pilots, for they understood the thoughts and intentions of their masters. Like a team of 4 stallions springing forward at the touch of a whip, the ship leaped across the waves. Not even a hawk, the swiftest of birds, could have kept pace with her. In the pre-dawn light, when the bright star, Venus, rose to announce the coming of Eos, the ship reached the harbor of Phorcys in Ithaca. The sailors did not wake the sleeping king. With practiced silence, they lifted Odysseus from the deck, still wrapped in his rugs and linen, placed him gently on the sand, still lost in his deep slumber, stacked his treasures, the gold, the bronze, and the fine garments, against the trunk of an olive tree, well away from the road so no traveler would rob him while he slept. Then the Phaeacians turned their ship and sped back toward Scheria. The earth-shaker Poseidon was livid. He saw his old enemy safely returned to his fatherland, draped in more wealth than he had ever won at Troy. "Father Zeus," Poseidon roared, "I shall no longer be honored among the gods if mortals show me no respect." With Zeus's reluctant permission, Poseidon waited for the Phaeacian ship to approach its home harbor. As the city watched from the shore, the god struck the ship with the flat of his hand. In an instant, the swift vessel was turned to solid stone, its roots fixed deep in the seabed, a permanent monument to the danger of helping the enemies of a god. Back on the beach of Ithaca, the mist began to swirl. Odysseus stirred and finally opened his eyes. He stood up and looked around, but his heart sank into his sandals. Athena had cast a gray fog over the landscape to protect him from being recognized too soon. Odysseus did not see the rugged cliffs he had dreamed of for 20 years. He saw only a strange, desolate shore. "Woe is me!" he cried, pacing the sand and counting his gold. "What land is this? What people live here? The Phaeacians have betrayed me. They have dropped me in a wasteland." He did not know that he was standing on the very soil he had spent 2 decades trying to reach. He was home, but the battle for his palace was only just beginning.